Hi, welcome to the National Critics' Choice Online News. I'm Robin Stienberg, and today we have a very special guest with me here in Singapore, and that's none other than Mr. Jonathan Dorf, and he's actually a playwright on a full-time basis, and he's been traveling around the world promoting ways on how teenagers can get themselves engaged in playwright and theater. Mr. Jonathan Dorf, please share with us, what's your experience like dealing with teenagers here in Southeast Asia, and what sort of cultural, adaptation that they have adopted between the West?
I think there's a lot of similarities. When I was here the last time in Singapore, I actually went to a number of Singaporean schools, and my style of teaching is a little bit different from the Singaporean style, which there seemed to be more, lessons that would be, there would be PowerPoints, and there would be the students would drill and things like that. And what I found though, because in the West we tend to use very, very interactive kinds of sessions, and the students were actually really good at adapting to them. Once they got the hang of it, they were ready to jump right in, and so I thought that was very exciting. And I really enjoyed working with them. After this festival, I'm actually going to an international school in Kuala Lumpur, which would be my first time in Malaysia, and I'm looking forward to that. It's the Australian International School, so I'm guessing that the students will be a mix of Aussies and then also folks who are local and are just attending there. So I'm looking forward to that. But I find by and large that that teenagers are teenagers wherever you go, and there may be some cultural differences in what they bring to the table, but I think theater is a common language in a lot of ways, and that allows you to communicate with people who may not come from exactly the same kind of background.
Now, you have actually published more than 30 plays and produced over 900 times in over 15 countries. That's quite a challenge. How do you manage to do that, and what was your passion behind it? When did you actually first start?
Well, I started writing plays when I was in high school myself. I was the editor of the school newspaper, and my advisor said, well, you've written everything else. I'd written poems and short stories and songs, and so he said, why don't you try writing a play? And I did, and they ended up producing it in the school festival. Sort of fast forward maybe probably a little over a decade later to the late 1990s, and I was writing plays, but I was writing those sort of serious adult plays. And I actually got a commission, which is basically where they pay you ahead of time to write the play. And most playwrights never get them, so we're very lucky when we get one where somebody is actually paying us money, and we know we're probably going to get a production. So I actually, in fact, had two commissions simultaneously just about. The Walnut Street Theater, which is a very large theater on the East Coast of the United States, and then a summer arts conservatory at Choate Rosemary Hall, which is a very well-known boarding school in the U.S. It's actually where John F. Kennedy went to school, and the famous playwright Edward Albee and actor Michael Douglas and a bunch of other people. And so suddenly I was being paid to write these plays for teens, which I hadn't done a lot of before, and so in doing so I discovered that I was actually kind of good at it. And from there, a few years later, I discovered that in this particular market, the best way to get out there is to find a publisher, because schools, it's hard unless you have a lot of productions. And at this point, I'm lucky that I have a fairly large list of people who have done my work, and I can send out an email, for example, when I have a new play, saying, I have a new play, who wants to premiere it? And I will get 10 people writing me back saying, we'd be really interested. But originally, getting a publisher is sort of your bridge to your audience. And so I hooked up with a company named PlayScripts, and they were at the time sort of small but very up and coming, and it turned out that they were the smartest, market savviest group of people around. And I feel like I've kind of risen with them. And then a few years ago, I started a company called Youth Plays with Ed Shockley, who is a very, very tall playwright. He's actually 6'8". thinking maybe the tallest produced playwright in America. And Youth Plays has grown as well. And in fact, Youth Plays, one of my plays with them, was just produced at an international school in Hong Kong, which I was very excited about because it was my first production there. And so between those things and the internet has been very helpful in just kind of getting the brand out there. I'm suddenly finding that I'm picking up lots of productions in interesting places. And especially more so in this part of the world, I've found in the last few years. I've had a few productions of some pieces in Singapore, and then recently South Korea and Japan a few times, and down on Australia and New Zealand. So I've been very lucky lately.
Now, what kind of challenges do you face in terms of copyright and trademarks while you produce those plays? Do you have any issues with that?
As a playwright, you always do. Normally as a playwright, when you write the play, you own everything, and nobody can make any changes without your permission, and nobody can produce the play without your permission. What has happened, and in fact we just corralled, there was an infringement. The new frontier of infringement seems to be people underreporting their performances, where they'll say that they're doing 2 and they're actually doing, in this case, 7. And so the internet has helped. There are a number of ways that you can police your work. In fact, I wrote an article for the magazine of the Dramatists Guild of America, which is the playwrights professional association in the States. It has over 6,000 members. And about a year and a half ago, I wrote an article how to protect your work. Most countries are subject to, I think it's the Berne Convention for copyright. However, there certainly are different philosophies, or I would say not even so much philosophy, it's more levels of knowledge of copyright. And so a lot of my plays in hard copy, more than the ones that are only electronic, have been infringed upon. In fact, there have been dozens of them, and it's been thousands of dollars, and you just have to be vigilant. I think that most people want to do the right thing. Sometimes they don't know what the right thing is, and that's where the problem happens.
So what's next for the Los Angeles playwrights? The Alliance of Los Angeles Playwrights. I know that you're a co-chair over there. What's the future like for them?
Well, right now we are the Alliance of Los Angeles Playwrights, or ALAP as we sometimes call it when we're speaking in brief, is a professional organization for playwrights, composers, and lyricists in LA, and we have somewhere between 250 to 300 members. We're actually getting ready to redo our website, which has been one of those, it seems like a kind of an annoying technical thing, but it's actually very important, because one of the things that we have, for example, is we have a catalog of plays online, and we get people from all over the world who may be looking for scripts to produce who come and visit that. And so we want to improve a number of things there. We want to grow our membership. We just participated in LA Stage Day, which was a big event in LA that brought all kinds of theaters and dance groups together. I actually spoke at that, and we're just kind of looking forward to continuing to build our profile. We have some reading festivals coming up. We have our big fall reading festival in September, which will be a festival of short plays, probably on the campus of some university. And so we have a lot of things, and we also do social events and networking events and all kinds of fun things.
Now, how important it is for teachers and institutions, as well as teenagers, to encourage them to create playwrights for theater, especially for teenagers, the teenage content?
I think it's crucial, because right now we have kind of this gap. Everybody, when you're an adult, you go to the theater, and the joke in the United States is that if you look at the theater audiences, it's sort of the blue-haired audience. It's, people have been going, my parents, who are fabulous, who are in their 70s, have been going to theater since forever, and I've been going to plays. I think I fell asleep on Broadway when I was 5. And I remember having this conversation with David Sarr, who is the artistic director of Child's Play, which is a very important children's theater. And he found that the challenges were, there are a lot of plays, in addition to obviously the adult stuff that I mentioned, for young children. And so it's really easy to find an activity and to bring your 8-year-old to the theater. The problem is that at a certain point there is this big drop-off, this gap. And so we go from going to the theater as children to seemingly not having anything to go to until we're adults again, which means that there's this huge amount of time during which we can actually lose people who may be interested because their passion gets, they're attracted to something else because they don't have the theater option. So I think that it's really important for teenagers to have that outlet. I think it's also really good for you. I don't write, on the one hand, I like, there's some writers who sort of doing drama as therapy, and that's not me. However, this is not to say that drama can't address a number of very serious issues. For example, I have a play called Thank You for Flushing My Head in the Toilet and Other Rarely Used Expressions. They actually did sort of a cut-down version of it in Singapore at a school in competition a few years ago, but it is my bullying play. And so it's been used by a number of schools in their anti-bullying efforts. My play 4 a.m. and especially my new play, The Locker Next to Mine, deals with teen suicide, which is a really important issue and a problem, certainly in the States that we're facing a lot. And I think that's true of everywhere because teenagers are under an awful lot of pressure. So I think that, for one thing, it gives them an artistic outlet and so a way to channel their energies in a very positive way. And at the same time, it's talking about things that maybe they're afraid to talk about with people. And so it's in two ways really helping them. And so I think it's important. And I think also, theater is important. For example, when I was younger and I worked with, I think they were 3rd or 4th graders, and I taught them how to write plays about mathematics. Now, whoever knew that you could write a play about math, but you can. And it's a way of teaching other content. Now, I don't believe that theater is only important. I want to emphasize it's not just that we should learn theater because it will help us, illustrate history lessons. We can, stage the American Civil War or World War II or whatever you want to have. But I think that that's a nice sort of side benefit. But I think that art for art's sake is just really healthy for people to encourage creativity, even if you don't become a professional actor or a playwright later on. I think that writing plays is great for your writing skills in general.
Now, speaking about writing skills, what kind of methods and styles, and even, how does a good playwright come about? What sort of strategies should playwrights should adopt, especially culturally as well?
Sure. Well, I think they should all buy my book, Young Playwrights 101. But in addition to that, I think obviously sort of how to write a play is a huge topic, and we could talk about that for hours. But I think that some of the most important things are to read plays and to see plays, because you need to be able to understand how what you write on the paper comes into being in sort of a fully realized way. And so when I write a play, I actually think about the play. I have actors in my head, and I see the play on its feet. So you're kind of actually, you're listening to it and you're seeing it while you're writing it, which I think is really important rather than just seeing words. But I think that going to take classes and getting as much of your work, finding a group of actors, even if they're just your friends, let's say you're a kid at school, get together with some of your other friends in the drama club and just have them read your play out loud, because I think that's how you learn. And I think that culturally, there's a lot to learn from other cultures, which is why it's kind of fun to go to conferences like this one, where I can meet practitioners from other places. Or, for example, when I was United States Cultural Envoy to Barbados, and I was there for a month. I had State Department health coverage. It was really great. And, my charge was to help improve the standard of playwriting in Barbados. So Barbados is an incredibly literate country. It was British colony, I think, until about 1960 or so, and very well educated populace. But I think that bringing in some fresh theater techniques and being able to meet with practitioners, and we actually had a reading festival at the end, and I think it was really useful for everyone, and I really enjoyed just being able to learn about their culture and to experience the island in the same way that I like going to Singapore. I also love coming to Singapore to eat because I think you have the best food anywhere.
So what is the difference between coming to methods and strategies? What is the difference between traveling from the West to the East, especially for teachers and instructors who are going to be teaching teenagers how to write playwrights and creating playwrights in their own context? Could you give 3 key observations or even learning experience, on how they can adopt and adapt and without having to step anyone's toes?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for as much as we think of, obviously there are cultural differences between, every culture, whether it's an Asian culture, Americans or the islands or in Africa. I have friends who have traveled down to Africa. I have friends who have traveled to India, or the British or Australians. I think everybody has their own particular style, but I think at the same time, I think it's almost more important to concentrate on what's universal. And I think at the end of the day, we have these teenagers who have great energy and great creativity. And I think that all of us need to recognize that creativity and give them the opportunity to try things. And even, teenagers are going to make mistakes. That's how they learn. I think that's how we all learn. I like to think that I have not stopped making mistakes. Hopefully they're better ones now. But, so I think that, having the opportunity to, just, we'll say if you're working on a piece, to really immerse yourself in it and to maybe have the teacher, for example, delegate to one of the students to be the assistant director and to come back with a scene and to try it. And maybe it will be great, and maybe it will be not great, and it's okay if it's not great, but I think that the generations have a lot to learn from each other. And so the teacher can bring some experience and the teenager can bring that youthful energy. And for example, if they come in with that scene that maybe is mostly great, but it's not quite great, that the two groups can help each other to figure out, all right, well, where maybe can we work on it a little bit and figure out how it can, how can we try it again differently? Maybe they both direct the same scene, in fact, and then we sort of compare and we see, how the different versions, because there's probably something great in both versions. And so how can we fuse those together?
And speaking about fusion, how does, could you give us one example of your experience in your travels, especially, how did you learn and overcome, and lessons learned from those teaching methods? And
that's a good question. It's a tough question. I think that sometimes when you're dealing with a new culture, and I think there's also the American, we tend to want to zip in like a bull in the proverbial bull in the china shop. And so I think that sometimes when you are bringing something which is new and different to people, there's this, there tends to be the belief that my way is better, and everybody kind of feels that way. And so I think that sometimes it's learning how to take gradual steps and to say, all right, this is good, but why don't we just maybe try changing this one little thing, and let's just see how that goes. I think that sometimes, and I found this from dramaturging plays, that it's sometimes better to ask questions than to make statements. And in asking questions, that allows the people who are being asked the questions to answer those questions in their own way and on their own terms, and so they can find the answer that's right for them, rather than my just saying this is the answer.
Well, asking questions is a good thing, folks. And speaking of which, what is your experience being in the Caribbean islands? Because they're culturally different. What is it like?
Being in Barbados was really great. In addition to the fact that it's beautiful, and it was interesting because Barbados is very British still. And so, one of the things was that I really loved, just as a cultural thing, was that your random strangers would just say good morning or good evening to you. You didn't know you at all, but it was how it was done, and I really enjoyed that. Barbados and the Caribbean in general does tend to run on island time, as they call it, and so it took a little getting used to, because I sort of have my American let's do it now, especially because even though I live in Los Angeles, where now we can always say, oh, traffic made us late. But I'm from the East Coast, where everything was like, let's go faster. But so I think that was just from a cultural standpoint. But at the same time, you also have this very rich Caribbean cultural tapestry. I'm a big fan of thinking of plays as pieces of music, and the music there is fantastic. And there's a whole, I went to in Oistins. There's basically call it like the fish fry, and I think it's a weekly event. It's like Friday nights, and there are all these bands, and you just have this very different sense of rhythm. And I think that every culture has its own sense of rhythm, just as there's a sense of rhythm here in Singapore. And so finding that sense of rhythm and finding ways to understand how that can fit into the writing, I think is really exciting.
Well, one last question, that is, you spoke about the reading festivals. There's one question that came about from an audience recently, and then they want to know how can they organize, and what is a good, effective reading festival? Especially here in Singapore, people are trying to create a reading festival.
Sure.
What is your experience like? Could you give us some recommendations?
Absolutely. I mean, I actually think that a reading festival is a fairly simple thing to put together because it's not a full production. So what we would do with the Alliance of Los Angeles Playwrights is we would do a call for short plays. And I would actually recommend that a good way to start would be short plays rather than having full-length plays. I know everybody wants to get them read, but the reality is it's hard to attract audience until you build it. Because we did some, and we would literally have 2 people show up. And so what we discovered is that by having, we'll say, 10-minute plays, where you involve a lot of actors and a lot of different writers, first off, a lot of different people get to participate. And also they obviously bring their friends, and so it is a good way to have a nice experience and to pack it into one afternoon, which is a good way to start. And I think you simply begin with a call for scripts, and you get a group of people who are the reading panel, who obviously are, when we do it in the Alliance of Los Angeles Playwrights, the readers are not members. They are outside people. Everything is submitted blind, so there are no names on the plays. The plays are selected, and then you get whether the group that is organizing it works with the writers, or you often will ask the writers, do you have a particular director that you would like to work with if you're selected? And so between the director, with help from the organizing committee if you need to get casting, and then what I would recommend initially is to simply do a script in hand. You can have music stands or something, but basically, so there's not staging, because one of the problems with a reading festival where things are staged is the audience actually gets confused, and it's kind of almost like they're seeing a production, but not quite, and so they start holding it to the kind of standards that you would hold a production to. But a reading festival is about the plays. It's not about the performances. Obviously, you want good actors and directors so that the play gets a good treatment, but at the same time, it's about showing off the work. At some festivals, there will be talkbacks afterward, in which case you want a good moderator. And I have different questions that when I run a talkback, I sort of have a way that it should go in order to avoid having people rewrite the play for the author, because feedback should be about what people experienced and not about you should do this, you should do that. As soon as I hear someone say you should, if I'm moderating, I cut them off, because that's about the play that they would write, not the play that they just heard. But I think that a lot of times it may be about celebrating the work, and maybe initially you don't even have that talk back. It depends what the point is of the reading festival. If it is developmental, you might have a talk back so that playwrights get some notes, or it might be that they simply talk to their director and maybe there's some dramaturgs and you don't open it to the audience. But again, like all things, you have to train the audience what you expect their takeaway to be, or how you expect them to respond. And I think if you teach the audience how to respond, you get really good feedback. As a playwright, I don't talk during these kinds of things. I just write down everything that's said, whether I think it's valuable or not, and then I sort it out later. But I think these can be really useful for people, and I think I mean, a reading festival is a great way to showcase writers and work, maybe for theaters for production later. And so I think that I think it's certainly possible for Singapore to set one or many of them up.
Hi, Jonathan. Thank you for joining us here again. Please tell us what will be your last word, well, not the last one, sorry, pardon me, but what will be your three key advice for the world to know, especially those who are pursuing their career as playwrights, for teenagers especially?
I think that never forget that what you're doing is really important, even if the world, sometimes treats writing for young people as less than, which it often does. But remember that you are creating the theater-going audience of tomorrow. Yeah. And I think that is probably the single most important thing to remember. And keep writing, keep working with teens, keep trying to make the play true, so that you're not talking down to them, but you're giving them material with which they can really connect.
And what's next for you? I mean, are you working on a new playwright? And at the same time, do you think social media is playing a very big role in the 21st century in terms of advertising and as well as distributing your content?
Next for me, I'm always working on at least 2 or 3 things. So I think that my next big project, I have a play called Rumors of Polar Bears, which is sort of a global warming themed play. And it was always meant to be a 3-part cycle. And the first part is published. I'm actually halfway through the second part, which is called Ursa Major. And then the third part will be Northern Lights. And so I'm hoping to finish them all this year. And then I actually have a comic whodunit that I want to write called My Rock Star Can Beat Up Your Boy Band.
Oh, wow.
And, fun teen comedy. And then I think that in terms of social media, I actually think that the internet is playing a huge role in marketing. It's really changed the way that we market things. I have a Facebook page. Youth Plays, my publishing company, has a Facebook page. We have Twitter accounts. I don't tweet as much as I should. In fact, I was thinking I might turn my phone on to tweet that I'm at AFCC right now. But I think that it's a great way, and of course I have a website, jonathandorf.com, and there's all kinds of content there. And so I think that in general, the internet has allowed us to reach out to people who never would have found us. I mean, I'm sure I would never have gotten productions in Asia and Australia and New Zealand and Africa. I've actually gotten a number of productions in South Africa. And in fact, I Skyped with the students who were producing. They were producing the full-length version of The Locker Next to Mine at a school in South Africa. And so it's completely changing the way that we do business and allowing playwrights actually to connect with performers and producers all over the world. And I don't think that's going to change. So I think we're only going to get more connected. And so I think that's kind of exciting. And we're even starting to write more plays about the internet, which is probably a mixed bag, but again, it creates this whole multimedia culture is changing even some of the performance styles that we're using. So I think it's all really exciting, and it's here to stay whether I like it or not.
So, Mr. Jonathan Dorf, thank you for joining us here at the National Critics' Choice. And Robin Steinberg, please do get in touch with us again. And if you would like to contact Mr. Jonathan Dorf, he has a website, and you can email him or even Facebook him anytime soon. Once again, have a good day ahead. I'm Robin Steinberg.